Hi everyone, it's Ollie and welcome to the second tutorial in this Java for Beginners series. In this tutorial I'm going to be explaining the basics of NetBeans and the directory structure that it creates when we make our Java applications. Also, we're going to be briefly touching on some of the first concepts about Java that you need to know. So the first thing we're going to do is create a new project, and we do this by hitting this yellow button here or pressing File, New Project. Once this dialog's popped up, we can select Java and then Java Application and hit Next. Now this is the important bit. We need to select a name for our project and also a location. You can see that I already have a location. It's stored in PHP Academy folder where I keep my tutorials. But you can see the project name is by default just giving it a name and a number. So I'm just going to call this project Beginners Java for PHP Academy. And I'm going to be using this project throughout the whole of this series, hopefully just to keep it static so I don't need to change anything. So you guys can pick wherever you want. I think the default location is in your documents in a folder called NetBeans Projects, and that'll be the default location. So save it there or save it wherever you like. It's just useful to put it in somewhere you're going to remember, because it will be where all of your Java source files are stored. So we make sure this one is unchecked. It shouldn't be checked anyway, but if it is, just turn it off. We don't need to worry about that now. Uncheck this one, create main class, because I will explain that later. And we do want to tick set as main project, because that basically makes it easier to run it, and you'll see why in a bit. So let's hit finish. And once it's created the new project for us, you see that it opens up on the side here in the projects bar, and I'll just drag it open so you can see the full name. And in case you can't see the project sidebar or it just doesn't pop up, you can hit window and then just press project. Simple as that. So once we've opened this up, you can see we have our project here and it's in bold. If you have multiple projects, the one in bold is your main project, and when you hit run, it basically is going to run the main project that's selected. And you can set and unset it by right clicking, but I digress. So we'll click the plus button and to see what's inside here, and you'll see source packages and libraries. The source packages is empty currently because we haven't created any files yet, and this is basically where it stores all of our files. The libraries is populated with many different files. As you can see, I can just keep opening them, they'll keep going, and this is basically, you recognize the word JDK, Java Development Kit 1.7 or 1. Whatever, depending on your version. It basically is all of the built-in Java files that have already been made by the people, the company themselves, and it's basically going to help us build our Java applications by providing a base library for us. So we don't need to worry about libraries too much, but that was just a brief explanation. So what we want to do first of all is create a brand new class, and we're going to make something called a main class, and I'll explain what that means in just a second. So we're going to right click and do new, and then assuming you can't see any of these, you want to click on other, which is just off the screen recorder, but it's the very bottom one that says other, and you'll see that we've got a whole load of different things we can make, and we want to select Java and then Java main class, because we want to, the main class is the class with the main method in, which I will explain in just a second. So we'll hit next, and we then need to give a name to our class. I'm just going to call it tutorial, and I'm going to capitalize it because that's the naming convention in Java. It's important to keep class names capitalized. Oh, and a bit about naming Java classes. You can have any letter, number, or underscore in the name, except the only rule is it must start with a letter or an underscore. You can't start the class name with a number. And that's pretty much the only rules about it. The stuff about keeping it capitalized, it's not necessary, but it's just sort of Java etiquette to make sure that it looks neat. So we can ignore everything else, we don't need to change it. Ignore this warning here, placing it in the default package, because I'll explain packages at a later date. So we can hit finish, and you can see that it's opened up in here, opened up in the project bar, and I'm just going to scooch that over a bit. You can see it's opened up in the projects bar, and it's also likes to generate a lot of random stuff for us. So we're going to Control A and just delete all of that. So I can explain I can explain to you the from the very start how we're doing. So first of all, I'm just going to explain briefly about the directory structure here. So I'm going to pause the video quickly. Alright, so I found the folder where I saved it in my PHP Academy Java for Beginners Java for PHP Academy. This is my project folder, and you can see that NetBeans has generated stuff for us. You can see it's generated this manifest file, this build file, also this NB NetBeans project folder. You can ignore all of these three here because they're not important to us right now. Whoops, definitely don't do that. You can ignore those three there because then we don't need them right now. The important one we need to look at is the source file, the source folder, sorry. So if we open this src folder, you can see we have tutorial.java, and that's the one we created here, this tutorial.java. So this folder here, source packages, is representative of this folder source here. So now that I've given you a brief explanation of that, you should know where to find your files if you ever need them. So now I'm going to teach you the very start and basics of Java. So the first thing we need to know about Java is that all of our code is put inside of classes. Now at this stage we can put a very simple analogy to classes. We can simply picture it as a folder, and the class is a folder which we must store all of our code inside. We can't have it outside the folder because then Java doesn't know where to look for it. So it must be all inside the folder to keep it nice and organized. When we go into more detail about classes later on, we're going to be looking at classes in a much different way, but for now, that's really the limit of the knowledge you need to know. So, how do we make one of these so-called classes? Well, the first thing we need to do is tell Java we want to make a class, and the syntax for this is first writing the keyword class. You can see any keyword in Java when we're in NetBeans highlights in a blue. So we first write class, and that says, alright Java, we want to make a class. And then Java says, okay, so what are you going to call it? The next thing we need to write is a name. Now, this is the most important part. The name of the class must always be the same as the file name up here. And those rules will change slightly as we learn more, but for now, you must remember that it must be always named the same as the file name. So in this case, tutorial. And it is case sensitive, so you can't have this as a lowercase t. It has to be a capital T. So now what do we do? Well, we've made our class and there's an error, and that's because we need to open and close our class. We do this, you may remember from the last tutorial where we tested out our installation, we do this by opening these curled braces or these spiked brackets. And I'm just going to open and close that and make some space. So now you can see if I hover over one of these, you can see it highlights in yellow. So we now have a class called tutorial, and we've opened and closed it, and all of our code will be placed inside of this class here. And we refer to this area as inside of it because it's inside of these two brackets. So just quickly again, the syntax for creating a class is writing the class keyword, giving it a name, which must be the same as the file name, and then opening and close it with these spiked brackets. So what do we do now? Well, whenever we run a Java program, Java needs to know where to start. It needs a starting point to run the code, because otherwise it could start anywhere. And this starting point is represented by something called the main method. You may remember that from the last tutorial. Again, you'll probably will recognize it when I type it. And pretty much every single application in Java ever, except for a couple of examples I can think of, pretty much every application is going to have a main method as a starting point. This main method looks something like this. So public static void main, then brackets string with a capital S, square brackets args, then we open and close it like we did with the class, like so. So that may look really convoluted and really confusing, and you might want to just sort of quit Java because of the complexity that looks, but don't worry, it's really not that hard. Because all you need to know for now is that this method here, this public static void main, the code inside here is going to be the code that executes first. So when we hit this big run button up here, this is the starting point. So let's just make the most basic program possible. We're going to print something out to the screen, and that is done by you doing this. We write system with a capital S, then we put a dot out dot print line, and that might also look quite complicated, but you don't really need to know how this works. All you need to do is memorize this line of code here and know that whatever we put in the brackets will print out to the screen. So in speech marks, I'm going to write hello world. And it's important to note that we use double quotes rather than single quotes, because in Java, single quotes do something quite different to what double quotes do. So you can see that it's underlined red, and if I hover over, it's because it says semicolon expected. expected, sorry. And that's because every line of code in Java must be ended, and we end that with a semicolon, like so. But you may be thinking, why didn't we end these lines of code with a semicolon? That's because when we open and close something, it may be a method or a class, when we open and close it with a spiked bracket, the ending is already implied by the closing bracket, like so. So we don't actually need to specify a semicolon. However, any lines of code within these methods here, or inside the classes, so basically any code that's not a method or a class that we're declaring, we need to end it with a semicolon. But anyways, so that's all I plan to teach you for this tutorial. We've basically covered the basic syntax for a class, and also we've briefly touched on the main method. Also, we've learned how to print stuff out to the screen. We don't need to know how any of this works yet, you just need to sort of memorize it. So memorize what the main method looks like, and memorize how we print stuff out to the screen using the system.out.println command. That's it for me this tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one.